Welcome, Bronco Nation, to another exciting episode. It has been a very exciting offseason here for Boise State. There is obviously a lot of questions going on about key starters, both for the offense and for the defense. There's a lot of excitement building up right now as August is here, and we are getting very close to the start of the season. It's only a few weeks away. You can taste it in the air. We are almost ready for kickoff. But before we get down to having all of our questions finally answered in that first game versus Georgia Southern, we have Ron Counts on today to have an opportunity to maybe get a peek behind the curtain and give us a glimpse at answering some of those questions for us right now. He has been, of course, attending all the fall camp, everything like that. He is a great beat reporter for the Idaho Statesman. So make sure that you guys follow him on his Twitter. I'll make sure that I put a link to that in the description of the video. But Ron is here today. We're going to be talking about Boise State fall camp. We're going to talk about Spencer Danielson. We're going to talk about the quarterback competition. We're going to talk about the running backs, wide receivers, the defense, what his impressions have been, and see if maybe he can give us some potential pointers towards answering all those questions the fan base is so eager to get an answer to. So thanks so much for coming on, Ron. This is going to be a great discussion. You've been on before, and it's great to have you back.
Yeah, man, thanks for having me on it. And you said it's a great time to be a Bronco fan. It's the excitement is in the air. The pieces seem like they're in place. The coaches are in place. Dirk Cutter might be a secret weapon for this team. It's going to be an exciting year.
Well, talking about those coaches being in place and that excitement in the air, can you talk a little bit about Spencer Danielson now? He's the head coach. He's running the practices. Can you talk a little bit about what it's been like watching him out there? What does the team feel different this year with him running it, versus being the defensive coordinator in years past? What's it like with Spencer Danielson running the show?
There definitely is a different vibe. I mean, you go back to when Spencer was hired. From the outside looking in, this might have been a really surprising hire, especially with guys like Bronco Mendenhall all in the mix. Bronco got an interview here. He took the job at New Mexico, but I mean, he has a lot more experience than a guy like Spencer Danielson. But the thing that Spencer Danielson has is the love of the locker room. We saw that last year when he took over as interim. Those guys played their butts off for him. They played hard for him. They were aggressive. And in this day and age, that's more important than ever because players now have more strength, more power than they have ever had in the past. Given the NIL money, given the transfer portal, they're not committing to a program for 4 years like they used to. If there's money, the money's better somewhere else, they're going there. But not here at Boise State. Spencer kept the majority of this roster together in the offseason, and that was a huge, huge win for him. And he's just a genuine guy, Spencer talks about his relationship with God, his faith, and he doesn't just talk about it, he lives it. He genuinely believes that if you treat people right, they're going to treat you right. And that's what he does, And you see him out, you mentioned practice, the vibe of practice is so different than it was under Andy Avalos. It was tense then. It wasn't much fun under Andy Avalos. And now the guys are out there smiling. You see Spencer out there, he's smiling and laughing and jumping around. He's giving energy. I've asked so many players about that, and they all said it gives them a boost, And that's huge this time of year because it's hot, it's smoky every day here in Boise State. No one wants to be outside. Spencer makes them have fun. He makes them enjoy it, and they're getting better because of that. So it's huge. The vibe is way different.
Well, it's not going to be an easy fall camp where there's no questions he has to figure out and make big decisions on, because one of the biggest is who's going to start for Boise State. Obviously, last year, Taylon Green, everything that happened, the two-quarterback system, he ends up transferring out. So now Boise State is left with Maddux Madsen and Malachi Nelson, and there is a legitimate quarterback battle going on. No matter what Boise State Bronco Nation wants to think, there is a legitimate quarterback battle going on right now, and you've been able to be front and center for that quarterback battle. Just what have been your impressions so far of Malachi Nelson and Maddux Madsen, and who do you think currently has the edge?
It's really been a back and forth battle. I mean, in terms of reps right now, Maddux Madsen has had the majority of the reps with the number one offense. I haven't really seen Malachi take very many reps with the starters at all. But in terms of performance, it's gone back and forth. Those first couple of days of practice, Malachi's arm talent flashed. I mean, Malachi has a big, accurate arm. He hits big passes on the sidelines in tight windows. He throws a beautiful deep ball. I mean, if it was just based on physical talent, Malachi wins this job, no question about it. But as everyone knows, it takes more than just being a great passer to be a great quarterback. You got to have it between the ears. And that's where Maddux Madsen has the advantage right now. Madsen just makes quicker decisions. He has a better pocket presence. It seems like he feels the rush a little bit more naturally than Malachi. And some of that's to be expected. This is Maddux Maddux's third year in the system. Malachi's learning a new system, but Maddux, he just knows when to to pull the ball down and run it. He knows when to take the check down pass. He's just a second quicker. And so, Saturday they had their first scrimmage. Maddux Madsen ran out there with the ones to start it. He led a 75-yard touchdown drive to open the scrimmage. We didn't get many stats. We didn't get much observation from the coaches and the quarterbacks after the game, but 5 different players caught touchdown passes in the game. So there's the promise there. If I had to guess right now, Maddux Madsen's in the lead because of experience, because of his pocket presence. But I'm going to say this. Don't think that whoever starts the season at quarterback is going to finish the season at quarterback, because looming in week 2 is a very tough test at Oregon. And even if this is a great Boise State team, Oregon might be the best team Boise State has ever played. Oregon had 8 players drafted last year. They could have just as many drafted again this year. So the chances are we could be looking at an 11-1 Boise State team that loses by 30 points at Oregon. That's just the reality of it. And when you lose a game by 30 points, who's the scapegoat 90% of the time? The quarterback. So just don't be surprised if there's a change at some point in this season. But right now, if the season were to start tomorrow, I think it's Maddux Madsen's job.
You got to watch him in practice last year. You got to see him throughout the season, obviously coming off of that injury. 2 questions here. One, does he look like he's fully back, 100% back from that injury? And then second, do you see an improvement for him, a step up from what he was doing in practice last year and during the season? Do you think he is improved coming into this year with that additional experience under his belt?
The first few days of camp, it was obvious that he was still a little bit rusty. And you touched on it. Madsen hasn't seen anything close to game speed since last November. So it's understandable that he'll be rusty. But early on in camp, he was forcing some balls. He had some balls tipped, some balls intercepted. And he was open about that. He said he had to cut down on those turnovers. But here in the last week, I keep using this term pocket presence. He just looks comfortable. He looks confident. He's making the right decisions. He's making quick decisions, and that's huge for a quarterback. You can be a millisecond slow on a decision, and that makes all the difference in the world as a quarterback. So Madsen over this last week has really shown that he's comfortable in that role. He's comfortable in the offense, and he knows what to do. He knows when to pull that ball down and run it. He knows when to roll out. He just feels that pressure without having to see it. So he has that it factor, if you know what I mean.
Right. So I know you said Maddux Madsen having the edge right now, and a good chance right now that he gets that start. I know the coaches were indicating that before fall camp, that he was at this time their current guy, and it was going to take a lot for Malachi Nelson to be able to come and catch him. But what do you think it would take for Malachi Nelson to be able to steal away that starting role?
I think he's going to show some really, really huge growth in terms of understanding the offense and making quick decisions here in the next 2 weeks. Like I said, he's got the arm talent. He's got the physical talent. He's got the tools to play with out there. He's just got to show that he's comfortable in this offense, comfortable enough to stand in the pocket, go through his progression, and make quick decisions. That's it. That's what he's got to do. He's got to go out there and show that. And, the coaches have been open. It's going to be the guy that gives him the best chance to win games that wins that starting job, right? And that sounds obvious, but it's not that obvious sometimes because, again, it's not always the best athlete. We saw it last year. Taylor Green was far and away a better athlete than Maddux Madsen, but he wasn't a better quarterback than Maddux Madsen. And so it's just going to be the guy that has it between the ears, the guy that can cut down on turnovers, the guy that can make the simple plays. And Danielson was open the other day about how he's really leaning on Dirk Cutter to help him make this decision. And what a great guy to have in your corner, right? I mean, Dirk Cutter's a guy who's been a head coach in the NFL, a head coach in college, an OC in the NFL. He worked with guys like Matt Ryan. He knows how to get the most out of quarterbacks. So who better to trust with this decision than Dirk Cutter?
So obviously you got to see Malachi Nelson when he stepped foot on campus during the spring, and the media made a big deal about his rate of development from the start of spring to the end of spring. Do you think that he's continued that same rate of development here through fall camp so far?
I don't think it's quite the same, but that's also to be expected because in spring, they're installing a very vanilla offense. They're installing the very basics of the offense. And you're right. He did grow from the first spring practice until the spring game. He looked really good in that spring game. He was decisive. He was accurate. He made the right throws. But now they're installing more of the playbook. Now the pressure is ramped up a little bit. So it's understandable that he's not advancing the same way as he was in spring. Like I said, he's got the arm. He's absolutely got the physical abilities. He's just got to get the mental side of the game down, And so Does he have a chance to win this job still? Absolutely. It's not Mad Dog's job by any means at this point, you know. And given this deep receiving core, a guy with an arm talent as much as Nelson has, he could steal this job at any moment. I just think right now the coaches are more comfortable with Madsen. They see Madsen more comfortable in the pocket, and that's giving him a leg up. But things can change in 2 weeks. They can easily change in 2 weeks. There's another scrimmage this weekend, another chance for Nelson to show what he can do. So it's still, excuse me, it's still very much a race.
Well, talking about that wide receiver room, let's move to discussing that. You've mentioned 5 different receivers caught touchdowns. There's been a lot of new faces on campus that have been stepping up. Transfers like Marshall have come in. I know people have talked a little bit about Camper as well, and and then of course Capel's coming back from injury from last year. And then there's some faces from last year that had a lot of excitement. You know, Prince and Bolt and Penry's also come back from injury at the end of last season. So, who has stood out to you so far in that crowded wide receiver room?
Well, I would definitely say Chris Marshall and Cam Camper have stood out in a big way. Both those guys came in this year as transfers. Marshall obviously is a former 5-star recruit. He's a guy that just kind of has it as their receiver. You know, he reminds me of a little more athletic Keyshawn Johnson. He's got a big frame. He knows how to box out defenders. You know, he can stretch the field if he needs to. And he's got really sure hands. Cam Camper is a guy who I think could be the kind of diamond in the rough here. You know, he took a long road to college football. He spent a year at JUCO, spent 2 years in Indiana, missed spring as he was recovering from an injury. This year, he's really come out and shown a knack for catching the deep ball, man. He's a really good, really quick route runner, runs crisp routes, has good hands, and he's long. You know, he's one of those guys that you describe more as long than tall. He's probably 6'2", 6'3", but he has freakishly long arms. He gives quarterbacks a nice target box to throw to. I think he's going to have a really good season. Then you look at a couple more guys that have really done a great job stretching the field. Prince Strawn and Austin Bolt. Austin Bolt caught a long touchdown in the scrimmage game. He's really looked explosive this year. And Prince, you know, Prince is one of those guys that just looks like an NFL receiver. 6'5", 225, almost 230 probably. Runs a great deep route. You know, doesn't run as crisp routes as a Chris Marshall or a Cam Camper. But when he hits that 9 route, he is gone. And he can catch some 50-50 balls. And then you have a guy like Latrell Capel's back this year. Huge. You know, they were missing leadership in the receiver room last year, and Latrell brings that. You know, remember in 2022, he led this team with 54 catches. He's a guy that can play outside. He can play in the slot. He's quick. He's shifty. He runs great routes. He has solid hands. I mean, I really think this receiving core can go 6 or 7 deep. And I'm going to throw another name out there. Ben Ford, a local kid from Eagle High School, really has had a strong camp. You know, he's had a chance because a couple of guys have been banged up. He's made some big plays. He's quick and shifty, can really operate out of the slot. So, you know, as many targets as there are, he can actually sneak in and steal a couple of plays.
So who do you think is kind of stepping up right now as that wide receiver 1? Do you feel like a guy has kind of established that rhythm with the quarterbacks, has set themselves up as that number 1 target, or is it kind of more of a wide receiver by committee at this point?
I think it's going to be Chris Marshall. I mean, he's a guy that has he and Malachi Nelson really showed their chemistry in the spring game. You know, Malachi's first pass of the game went to Chris Marshall. I think he caught 3 or 4 passes before halftime in that game. He's a guy that can do so many things, as I mentioned before. He can run the short route. He can run the short curls and box out a defender. He can stretch the field. He has a great knack for those sideline kind of shoestring catches. So I think he's a guy that really can be that one. And then Latrell Capels is going to get a lot of passes this year. They're going to move him around. They're going to play him outside. They're going to play him in the slot. I see him catching at least 50 passes again this year. So I think Marshall and Capels are your top 2 there.
So if you had to describe the strength of this wide receiver unit in their play style, how would you say that? Would you say that this is more of a deep ball threat wide receiver room? Is it more of the short passing game, that mid-range, or just are they multifaceted in every area? I mean, what is their primary strength?
I think they can really stretch the field really well. And going back to the quarterbacks, that is a feather in Malachi Nelson's cap because the best thing he does is throw the deep ball right now. I mean, I mentioned all these names: Cam Camper, Chris Marshall, Prince Strawn, Austin Bolt, even Latrell Capels. These guys can all stretch the field. They're all explosive and can catch the deep ball. So I see this being an explosive offense this year. And that's what Coach Danielson said after the scrimmage. He used the word explosive probably 5 or 6 times. As I mentioned, 5 different guys caught touchdown passes. So expect this to be an exciting passing game this year.
So moving on to the running backs here, which is thankfully one of those positions on the team that there is no controversy about. Obviously, Ashton Jeanty, Heisman, Ashton Jeanty. He's the Boise State is running a real campaign for him, and he has a legitimate chance of going out and winning that. But Ashton Jeanty is the star of this team, observing the practices, observing the scrimmages. Do you feel like there is a focus on that running game? Is this an offense that is focusing, not necessarily like, I mean, it's not going to be Army, you're not running ground and pound every play, but is this an offense that is focused on utilizing Ashton Jeanty as their primary weapon?
I think it will be. And not just because of Ashton, but because of the depth there in the running back room. And
Yeah.
let's start with Ashton. He's a guy that does have a legitimate shot at the Heisman. I'm a Heisman voter myself, and if he has a season like he did last year, he'll get in my vote. Now, and the reality is, the thing that's working against him is he's not a quarterback in a Power Four conference.
Sure.
7 out of the 8 last Heisman winners have all come from Power Four conferences. They've all been quarterbacks. So he's going to have a really, really special year to win that award. But he's capable of doing it. He's strong, he's fast, he's got elite vision, and his contact balance is just amazing. I can't tell you how many times a guy has taken his legs out and he's found a way to keep his feet and make a big run. So I think I can see him, averaging 30 plus carries a game this year. No
Wow.
problem at all. Now that being said, Breezy Dubar and even the freshman Sire Gaines, they're both looking really, really good. I kind of compare some of these guys. I like to make pro comps to those guys. Breezy Dubar kind of reminds me of an Adrian Peterson. He runs kind of upright, but he runs very powerful. He's got the speed. He's kind of a one cut and go type of slasher. When he hits the hole, he's gone. And Sire Gaines, man, for a freshman, I haven't seen a freshman as physically impressive as him since Ashton Jeanty. This kid is jacked. He's fast. He's physical. He runs like Marshawn Lynch. He wants to run over guys. He's going to see some carries this year for sure. And then we got to mention Tyler Crow. Crow had 2 long touchdown runs in the scrimmage game. He's a 6-year senior. He's one of the strongest players on the team. He's not a guy who gets talked about in this running back room. He's probably going to play more of a fullback role, but man, he's looking explosive right now. He's going to get some carries. So, they really could go 4 deep, and I can see them running the ball 40, 45, maybe even 50 times a game sometimes.
Now, what about Dylan Riley? Obviously, that was a guy that there was a lot of excitement on the recruiting trail about him, but he came in later. He didn't get that early graduation coming in the spring. So Sire Gaines got that leg up early on, but Dylan Riley, aka the Jet, he's a speedster out there. You've seen him at practice now. What's been your impressions of him? And then do you think there is any form of role that he can play, or is he maybe looking at a red shirt this year?
I can say this. Dylan Riley is one of the fastest players on the field right now. He has got the speed. Another freshman as well, wide receiver Cameron Bates. Those 2 guys are easily 2 of the fastest players on the team. Riley needs to put on a little bit of weight. He's a little bit skinny. I don't know how many carries he's going to get this year, but he can certainly find himself getting a special teams role. So I wouldn't be surprised if he red shirts, but they're going to find a way to utilize that speed in some way.
Well, I love that you mentioned the special teams because that's the next portion of this is discussing that return game. So we saw in some of those early videos a roster of guys out there catching punts, catching kick returns. Jeanty was one of them, which I know raised some eyebrows, myself included. So first off, before we kind of talk about, kind of some of those other players, is Jeanty going to have a role in this return game, or was that just kind of a let's see what he looks like returning if we ever need to throw him out there?
It certainly seems like he's going to have a role. I talked to Stacey Collins about this, and Stacey said he's not afraid to use starters at special teams. His philosophy around special teams is not to make it an afterthought. Some coaches say, "Oh, you can go play special teams if you're not good enough to start on offense or defense." Stacey Collins wants starters on offense and defense, and with a guy like Jeanty, it's a risk-reward situation, right? Jeanty might be the most explosive, exciting player on the team with the ball in his hands, no question about it. But you can't afford to get him hurt. So I don't see him taking every punt or kickoff, but I can see him getting some. Other guys that are going to be in that mix for punt, especially Cooper Jones is a young man that came in from Utah State, built like a running back, listed as a wide receiver. He really made his name as a punt returner at Utah State. He's going to get a long look there. Latrell Caples is a solid punt returner. Chase Penry is a solid punt returner. So I think those are going to be your top 4. Jeanty, Jones, Caples, Penry in terms of punt return. Kickoff return is a little more wide open. I can see Caden Dudley seeing some more time there. Another transfer that recently came in, Caden Chan from JUCO. He's a fast guy that can see some time there. Chase Penry's going to see some time there, and maybe we see a Dylan Riley or a Cameron Bates. Kick return is one of those areas where you can't have any hesitation. You got to catch that ball and you got to find the hole and go. And Dylan Riley and Cameron Bates do that better than anybody. So I wouldn't be surprised to see those guys see a few chances there.
Yeah, Boise State last year for their kick returning and their punt returning, it was one of the worst that the school has ever put together. Last year, they were 78th in the country in their averages for returns, and they were 120th in the country on the average of punt returns, less than 4 yard average on only 8 punt returns for Boise State. So, with those names that you've seen out there, or those guys that you just rattled off, so those players that you've seen out practicing, and just Stacey Collins obviously returning, do you see a significant improvement for this return game this year?
I think so. Now, the reality of college football is right now that punt returns have been somewhat negated in the game. Hang times have improved. Directional punting has improved. You look at 6, 7, 8 years ago. A great example, Tim Gilligan, former Boise State receiver, who is Cooper Jones's uncle. He returned punts for Boise State, and he averaged something like 14 yards per punt return back then. No one in the country is doing that now. It's just the punting is so much different. If you can average 7, 8, 9 yards per return, you're doing great in that role. So I just think the game has changed in that way. There's so many Aussie punters in the game now. They're so good at those directional punts. Hang times have improved so much. So I think expectations are different now than they were 10 years ago for punt returners. Now, kick returners, that's still wide open. You can, that's where you can still take some momentum. You can flip the field, and Boise State's got some guys that can do that. Caden Dudley did it pretty well last year before he got hurt. Cooper Jones actually has done some kick returning in the past, so I think they have a chance to make some big improvements there.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned Cooper Jones and his relation to Tim Gilligan there. Ron wrote a great article on Tim Gilligan and Cooper Jones, and so I'll put a link to that in the description. And then obviously, my more recent videos, Tim Gilligan came on. We were able to talk about his time at Boise State and also his nephew coming to the Blue. So I'll put links to all of that in the description. Definitely recommend checking out. Yeah, it's exciting to see what's going to be happening with the return game. But I think the unit that has probably the most questions, if you remove the quarterback battle as a controversy, the offense itself is pretty solid. But the unit that probably has the most questions for it is the defense for Boise State, because last year obviously wasn't what Boise State fans expect out of the defense, and it's been a couple of years of not necessarily stellar defensive performances. So just looking right now at the defense for Boise State, what you've seen so far at fall camp, that defensive line, obviously, Ahmad Hassanein, one of the greatest defensive players in the Mountain West, defensive Mountain West preseason player of the year. So very excited for him. But have you seen anybody that looks like they may be stepping up alongside him in that role as a threat on the defensive line this year?
I think overall, the depth on the defensive line is really, really going to be improved this year. I mean, let's start on the interior. At nose tackle, you've got Herb Gums, who's an explosive 300-pounder. And playing behind him is a guy who I think could take the biggest step on the team this year, in Sheldon Newton. He came in last year from Northern Arizona. He's slimmed down a little bit. He's lost 6 or 7 pounds. He's down to 320, down to 320. He's a massive human being, but he looks a step faster this year. He looks more confident. I think he's going to be really good in that role. And then at 3 tech, you guys have a lot of experience there. Braxton Feely, Michael Callahan, both those guys have played a lot of snaps. Feely had 3 snaps, 3 or 4 forced fumbles last year. I think he's going to take a step forward this year. And even though there's that much depth, there's a young guy coming up named Michael Madry. He's wearing a pretty important number in 99 that Scott Matlock made famous here. That young man looks explosive this year. He was really disruptive in the spring game. He looks really disruptive now. I can see him getting some snaps there as well. And then on the ends, obviously you mentioned Ahmed Hassanein. He's really motivated. This is his last year of college ball. He's motivated to improve on those numbers from last year. And he's got some help this year. They brought in Tavion Woodard from Ball State. 5-year player there at Ball State, had 11.5 sacks in his career there. He's a guy he's a big guy, 260 plus, really plays the run well, has some pass rush moves. So I think he's going to pair really well with Ahmed Hassanein. And another young guy we saw a little bit last year in Max Siege, a young man from Germany. Came in last season really physically impressive, really started growing. They had an injury last year. He's healthy this year. I can see him getting some snaps as well. So especially on that front, the depth is way better than it was last year.
You talk about replacing players, the great depth for the defensive line, I think improves that unit. But the linebackers, they lost a key guy there in Schramm, obviously. Now, he had some injuries throughout the season that allowed some other guys to get some experience. So it's not necessarily a completely untested unit. But aside from Simpson, who is the star right now of that linebacker core, who do you see stepping up and having a huge year this year for the linebackers?
Well, this is no shot at DJ Schramm at all because I love DJ Schramm, but I don't think they're going to miss a beat because Marco Notriani showed what he can do last year. He played for Schramm in the first 5 or 6 games of the season, had 50, 53, 54 tackles in the first 6 games of the season. He's a guy that's got a great nose for the ball. He's going to start at weak side linebacker this year, and he's a big physical kid, great nose for the ball, really fills the hole well. And in the scrimmage this past weekend, he had a sack and an interception. So it shows that his understanding of the defense and understanding of what offenses are trying to do has improved. So between Andrew Simpson, Marco Notriani, and Jake Ripp, I think that linebacker room is going to be really, really stacked. They're going to have a really good year there.
One player I forgot to mention on the defense that I've seen his name thrown around a couple of times in the articles coming out of training camp is Virgin on that defensive line there. Can you talk a little bit about what you've seen out of him so far in the fall camp?
Absolutely, yeah. He's going to start at edge for them, and he's a young man that really, I thought he had a great year last year, even though it doesn't show on the stat sheet. He didn't have any sacks, but he was a millisecond away from having 5 or 6 sacks last year. He's done a great job of putting on weight, getting more explosive this year. He's put on about 8 or 9 pounds this offseason. He's looking more the part. He's looking quicker. He's a guy that I think could really come out and have 5 or 6 sacks this year and be a great compliment to Ahmed Hassanin. I can tell you this right now. There's a lot of questions for starting jobs going on right now, but the two that there's not a question of, Ahmed Hassanin is going to start at defensive end. Jaden Virgin Morgan is going to start at edge. Those are going to be your guys in game one, and they're going to be a great duo.
Talking about those questions about starters, let's look at the secondary. So you have a couple of guys back there who are going to be absolute ball hawks that are going to be solid. And your Shea Oladipo playing at that nickel role like he did last year. He's going to continue to be fantastic. But the corners and the safeties, there's a little bit of questions about maybe there may be some shifting parts in the safety room, and there may definitely be some new faces stepping up at starting for corners with the transfers that have come in. So can you talk to me as far as the corners go? Who has stepped up, and who do you think are you looking at as being your primary starters out there for game one?
Well, in my opinion, the corner is going to be the most improved unit on the team this year. And for one reason, Jeremiah Irby, the young man that came in from Cal. This kid is just a ball hawk. He's an absolute ball hawk. He was also a star wide receiver at Menlo Atherton High School in California. His senior year, he caught 52 passes for a little over 1,200 yards and 15 touchdowns. His ball skills are second to none. He had at least 5 interceptions in the spring. He's had a couple more big ones here in fall camp. He's going to start at one corner. And opposite him, his former high school teammate, Amarion McCoy, came in last year from Laney College, showed his ball skills. He had a team high 3 interceptions, got his hands on probably 5 or 6 more passes that he could have intercepted. He's a young man that's really physically impressive. He has that build to be a big cornerback. So I think between Amarion's physicality and Jeremiah Irby's football IQ, they're going to be really, really good there. And then backing them up, you got some guys with experience. Markel Reed's back for his 6th year. He's played a lot of snaps, had a lot of injuries, but he's a guy that has some experience back there. And then they bring in Davon Banks from Washington, a kid that played 2 games last year before suffering an injury. He's a young man that can play a lot of different positions. He can play both outside corner positions. He can play nickel. He's going to get some snaps this year in some way, and it's going to show. He's a physical guy. He's a bit of a talker out there. First day of fall camp, him and Prince Strong got into a little scuffle because Davon was flapping his gums a bit. But that's what you got to do as a corner. You got to get in the receivers' heads, and Davon is really good at that. So your top 4 going into camp are Jeremiah Irby, Marion McCoy, Markel Reed, and Davon Banks. And then I'll throw a young one in there and Deontay Thornton. Physical freak. I mean, this kid looks like he could be a safety easily. He looks like he's a couple Big Macs away from being a linebacker. Got the 6'8" going, big kid. He's the corner of the future here. So how much playing time he gets this year, I don't really know. Injuries happen. He could come in because of that. But early in the season, those 4 that I mentioned are going to be your top 4 guys.
Do you expect any shuffle for the safeties this year? Because obviously you have Alexander Tubner back there, who's been a stalwart part of this defense. And I don't necessarily expect him getting taken out of the rotation. But between the positions for Rodney Robinson and Ty Benesfield, you kind of have, Benesfield, he's fast and he demands to be on the field. But Rodney's also put his time in and had some good moments as well. Do you see a different rotation there for the safeties and maybe a larger role for Benesfield this year?
I can tell you with almost 100% certainty that Ty Benefield is going to start this year.
Wow.
Randy Robinson's a guy that's got a lot of experience. He's a strong leader on this team, but he just doesn't have the physical traits that Ty Benefield has. Benefield came in as a freshman last year and looked like an upperclassman. Great
Hmm.
ball skills, great instincts. He's 6'2", probably almost 210 now. Good physicality. So your starting safeties are going to be Alexander Tubner and Ty Benefield, and they're a great complement because Tubner is just all over the field. He's maybe the best pursuit player on this team. He's not a big guy, but he plays like a big guy. So I can see them starting there. Oladipo is a beast at nickel. He's not going to give that job up. There may be some shifting. Some other guys might get some snaps there, but Oladipo has shown from day one that he's got great ball skills. He's great at playing against the run. He's very physical. He can play man-to-man defense. So he's going to have that nickel job. And a couple other safeties that are going to be in the mix this year. We mentioned Rodney Robinson. He's a guy that's going to get some playing time in different positions. They also added Koanohi Kaniho to the safety room this year. A lot of experience at corner, pretty good ball skills, really good tackler. So he's going to see some time. Don't be surprised if you see the defense play a lot of dime package this year. They're going to have 5-6 DBs on the field this year, 3 safeties in a lot of those packages. So I think they're going to be really, really much improved there.
Well, if this Boise State defense can kind of fulfill that missing piece and combine it with the offense, and of course, we didn't talk about them because they're not really question marks here. You've got the 2 best special teamers in the entire country, and James Ferguson Reynolds and Jonah Dalmes. So you combine all those pieces together. You mentioned this could be a team that's sitting there 11-1. Is this a playoff contender for Boise State this year?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. They got to be one of the top 2 favorites in the G5 to get that 5th guaranteed spot in the playoff. It's going to come down to Boise State, Liberty, and then a combination of Memphis and Tulane. Now, the reality is this. Liberty is probably going to go undefeated the game. They play a cupcake of a schedule. Their toughest opponent this year is App State, who's going to be a good team, but they're certainly not Oregon. They're certainly not Oregon State or Washington State. They're not even UNLV, in my opinion. The reality is Liberty is probably looking at another 12-0 record. So the question is, how do voters, I'm one of them, how do voters weigh a 12-0 Liberty season versus 11-1 Boise State season? In my opinion, if Boise State goes in 11-1, they got to get the nod, especially if their only loss is to Oregon, who's going to open the season as a top 3 team in the country. But that's the tough reality for Boise State is they got to go 11-1. 10-2 might not cut it. 9-3 is certainly not going to cut it. So if they've got to go 11-1, and they've got a tough schedule. Let's be real. Oregon's not the only tough team on Boise State's schedule. Yep. Oregon State, Washington State, they're not going to be as good as they were last year, but they still have enough Power 5 talent to be a problem. But those are not gimme games by any means. They also got to play UNLV, who's going to be really good this year. And in my opinion, San Diego State's going to be much improved this year. And late in November, they got to go to Wyoming and play a November game in Laramie. That's never easy to win. So, I mean, as much as I think that this team has potential to go 11-1, 9-3 is a reality for this team. It really, really could happen. And there's no way they're in the playoff at 9-3. There's almost no way they're in the playoff at 10-2, to be honest with you. So Boise State's got to go 11-1, especially if Liberty goes 12-0.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm right there with you. I think this is a Boise State team that's going to be much improved across the board. I love that you're seeing the same things in fall camp that we were hoping for Boise State. Much improved defense overall. The secondary, I know JL Skinner, when he came on, he was just saying they just needed time. When he came on, he previewed the defense with me, and I was asking, like, what does this unit need to do? And he said they did it, man. They just needed to get some experience. And now they've got that experience. They've brought in some new faces, and I think you're going to see a much improved unit. And now the offense overall with Ashton Jeanty, and then a exciting couple of quarterback options for Boise State that I think will run this offense effectively. I think you are looking at a Boise State team that's going to be up in that discussion there at the end of the year. I don't necessarily believe it will take 11-1. I think that a 10-2 with the Mountain West Championship games, so an 11-2 Boise State theoretically, maybe if that Oregon game is a little closer, could potentially get through over an undefeated Liberty, especially if they have a couple of close scares like they did last year. But either way, it is an exciting time to be a Boise State fan. It's an exciting time to be a Boise State reporter getting to cover this team and see where they get to go. And so I know we're all going to be excited together, hopefully watching Boise State get back on track to what Boise State fans and the media in general are expecting to see out of this team. So either way, it's great to see Spencer Danielson bringing a new energy to that locker room and the players having fun, which at the end of the day is what it's all about. This is just a game that's I was going to say nobody's getting paid. Now that it's NIL, people are getting paid, but it's still not professional sports. We're still out there to have fun. So I'm glad the players are out there having fun and showing improvement overall. Do you have any final comments or thoughts on the team this year from your observations from fall before we wrap up?
Just one observation, you touched on Jonah Dalmas there. I mean, what an amazing story Jonah Dalmas is. This is the kid that walked onto the team after a 2-year church mission, earned a scholarship his first year, and now he has a chance to end his college career as the most productive kicker in Mountain West history and the most productive kicker in NCAA history. The NCAA record is 97 field goals. Jonah Dalmas is sitting at 80 right now. He easily should pass that. So, I mean, what an amazing story to go from walk-on to the best ever to do it. It's just amazing.
It's gonna be great to watch these special teamers play. Even when a drive stalls out, as a fan, I'm still like, oh, that happened. But then you get to see two of the greatest to ever do it come out and perform for Boise State. So that's incredible to see as well. It's going to be a great year. It'll be exciting to see how this quarterback competition ends. Everyone, if you want to keep up to date on the quarterback competition and everything that's going on with Boise State, make sure that you follow Ron on his socials. I'll put a link to his Twitter in the description of the video. And obviously make sure that you also read along on the articles that he writes, Idaho Statesman. He does a fantastic job. Appreciate you coming on, Ron, and being able to be part of this discussion with us. And we look forward to what Boise State's able to do this year.
Hey, no problem. Have me on anytime.
Thanks so much for coming on. Thanks everybody for watching all the way to the end. As always, make sure you like and subscribe. Make sure you go and follow Ron and all of his stuff. And thanks so much for coming on here, Ron, and everyone for sticking all the way to the end. As always, go Big Blue!